Is Brics the group that poses a threat to the Western Alliance's attempt at realizing world domination? The United States has since the Second World War been accepted by its allies as their leader and has used this blanket acceptance of its newfound status to its advantage by creating international organizations whose objectives, although laudable in supporting reconstruction after the war, allowed the United States and a select group of its allies the opportunity to exercise their control over the differently advantaged member countries. While Asia and Africa were gradually waking up from long years under colonial subjugation and trying to find a starting point from where they would try to make something out of a bad deal, during which time the West had already learned a great deal from the Industrial Revolution in terms of production and the power of marketing, and used that experience to carpetbag the world under the guise of free trade. Almost all the high-income countries continued to live off the loot of the countries they subjugated over the centuries. It was only in the 2000s that the reduction of their wealth was felt, and alternatives sought to first reduce the decline in their reserves and corner as much of the market as they possibly could. The easiest strategy to corner the market was through the forced colonization of countries using the military to overpower and dominate, which was not an alien idea to them. It did go against the general liberation and empowerment of nations, as education of the masses became universal, accompanied by global campaigns for human rights and freedom yet unheard of. A disadvantage for the carpetbaggers was also the increase in communications and access to information, no Morse code using drums. The strategy would need to identify weaknesses in governance, exploit the weaknesses, and create a dependency on the provider of the goods and services. In management speak, this might be called lobbying. A very apt and current example is the Israel lobby of the United States, which is now mentioned as the de facto USA government. The table shows the strengths of the few high-income countries, taken as examples for this presentation. Most of the indicators are rated above 50, while many are closer to 100, which means that in terms of overall governance, these countries offer the best standards and are envied by the rest of the globe. The following tables present the strengths and weaknesses of the Brics members by indicator and point out the most glaring vulnerabilities that are opportunities for Western Alliance to take advantage of. While reviewing the information, please note that the data was collected and analyzed by the World Bank, which some might say is biased towards the high-income countries. Control of corruption. I have used the United States as the standard to be measured against. Corruption is defined as the extent to which public power is exercised for private gain, including both petty and grand forms of corruption, as well as capture of the state by elites and private interests. The information shows that a high level of corruption exists in all Brics countries, which is a weakness that stems from centuries of exploitation and plunder of their wealth and natural resources, making the access and control over resources a priority for the public as a survival mechanism. Some of the factors that facilitate corruption are referred to in Why Corruption Matters, Understanding Causes, Effects, and How to Address Them. Evidence paper on corruption, January 2015 by UK Department. Government effectiveness. I have used the United States as the control to be measured against. Government effectiveness captures perceptions of the quality of public services, the quality of the civil service and the degree of its independence from political pressures, the quality of policy formulation and implementation, and the credibility of the government's commitment to such policies. India, China, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE appear to have effective governments, while the remaining members vary in their vulnerability to possible pressures imposed on them from external sources. Political stability and absence of violence/terrorism. I have used the United States as the control to be measured against. Political stability and absence of violence/terrorism measures perceptions of the likelihood of political instability and/or politically motivated violence, including terrorism. All Brics members show a high level of political instability and threat from terrorism. Terrorism is a strategy that disrupts social and economic patterns, influences insecurity, fear and panic, decreases production and productivity, and encourages dissatisfaction with the government's effectiveness in providing a safe and secure environment. Regulatory quality. I have used the United States as the control to be measured against. Regulatory quality captures perceptions of the ability of the government to formulate and implement sound policies and regulations that permit and promote private sector development. Rule of law. I have used the United States as the control to be measured against. Rule of law captures perceptions of the extent to which agents have confidence in and abide by the rules of society, and in particular the quality of contract enforcement, property rights, the police, and the courts, as well as the likelihood of crime and violence. Voice and accountability. I have used the United States as the control to be measured against. Voice and accountability captures perceptions of the extent to which a country's citizens can participate in selecting their government, as well as freedom of expression, freedom of association, and a free media.
As everything gets more complicated with governments experimenting with strategies to finally arrive at one that works for them, they find public opinion and involvement threatening their ability to understand the outcomes of their experiments, when, in the interim, the experiment may encourage the violation of human rights, integrity of national and international borders and treaties, and the disruption of social, economic, and political systems, making public concern an irritant, and using the justification of having the people's mandate to justify their exclusion from the decision-making process. Thus, personal reasoning justifies the dilution of the democratic process to allow for the entry of authoritarianism. An authoritarian government imposes strict rules that limit the personal freedoms of its people. Citizens of countries that have an authoritarian government have diminished rights and privileges and are typically unable to freely worship, fully express themselves, or choose their leaders through free and fair elections. Authoritarian governments come in many forms and also rank among the most corrupt governments in the world.